And the last half of the 11th Royal Psalm, Psalm 144, we're going to be looking at verses 9 through 15. Seems like I haven't wakened yet. Awakened, whatever the term is. Anyhow, we're going to finish our examination of the 11 Royal Psalms. These Psalms we haven't mentioned it before, but they're probably sung on special occasions. By whom? Well, probably by either the king or his representative. And such events could be coronation, yearly celebration, and remembering the last year's work for the king, celebration of military victories, all kinds of events. These things might be sung at least some of them. Some are more appropriate for general usage than others, of course. The first half of Psalm 144, remember, dealt primarily with past blessings and interventions of Yahweh, particularly on behalf of the king, and quite often in times of battle. So this half, though, is going to deal with current and future possibilities. Our last half of Psalms today has just 3 parts. In verses 9 and 10, we'll find the king offering a short hymn of praise for Yahweh. In verse 11, we'll find a short prayer for Yahweh's intervention. And then in the last verses, 12 through 15, which, by the way, many scholars do not feel should be considered part of the prayer or part of the royal psalm, because it deals primarily with Yahweh's presence and his blessing on the land and the people, rather than on the king. But we'll look at all of the verses 9 through 15 while we're looking at it this morning. So let's get into it, and we'll see the king promising to sing a new song of praise, and it will imply an increased level of praise. So it's almost as if the king's making a vow. So Psalm 144, verses 9 and 10. I will sing a new song to thee, O God. Upon a harp of 10 strings, I will sing praises to thee. There'll be musical accompaniment, he says. And now he's going to praise God. This is why he's going to sing this new song. To thee, O God, who dost give salvation to kings, who dost rescue David his servant from the evil sword. This is a psalm of David. David promises to compose a new song and sing it in praise to his God. His God delivers kings from the evil intent of the king's opposition, and whether that's foreign or domestic, we'll get a better view of that in a bit. And in particular, this God rescues David from potential death, probably a rescue on the battlefield. Remember that David quite often spoke of God's deliverance, because remember, David was a warrior king. This was likely a song of victory that David was promising, a military victory more than likely. David did have political opposition at home, but most of the serious opposition that threatened his life was in fact on the battlefield. So, again, scholars believe that this song was given in the face of some kind of current calamity. What calamity, we don't really have an idea or any information. And it was given probably in celebration of what Yahweh was going to do. Not what he had done, but what he was going to do on behalf of the king and on behalf of Israel. So, let's check out the king's plea for deliverance and his description of the enemy. Both find some interest here. This is in verse 11 of Psalm 144. Rescue me and deliver me out of the hand of aliens. This would imply that these are a Gentile nation, a foreign nation. And then he describes these people, these nations, whose mouth speaks deceit, and whose right hand is a right hand of falsehood. So everything they say and they do is not on the up and up. The enemy seems to be, as we mentioned a moment ago, a foreign Gentile nation. Their mouths spew deceit. Their actions are filled with lies, deceit, and deception. Of course, hoping to gain some advantage over anyone they were after. Verse 11, if we look at it, if you're going to remember from our last session, this is a close repeat of the king's plea in verses 7 and 8 of Psalm 144. Excuse me. Let me review that for you. 144 verses 7 and 8, just 3 or 4 verses before the one we're looking at, verse 11. So in verses 7 and 8 it says, stretch forth thy hand from on high. It's asking God to immediately respond for a rescue. Rescue me and deliver me out of great waters. And remember, the great waters refers to Gentile opposition and chaos and attack, all those sorts of things. So it was the difficulty created by a strong Gentile nation in opposition to Israel. Out of the hand of aliens, so he's repeating again, these are not fellow Jews, whose mouths speak deceit and whose right hand is a right hand of falsehood, the same thing we just read in verse 11. So evidently David thought that this was important enough to end the king's part before he gets on with the nation and the land. Again, great waters represent the powers of a strong foreign nation, a Gentile nation, a nation that couldn't be trusted one way or the other. Some claim, again, that this is where this royal psalm should end. Not that the psalm should end, but what continues does not have any direct reference to the king, because the following 4 verses are a plea for the people and the nation rather than a focus on the king. Nevertheless, as I said, we'll go ahead and look at it. As a matter of fact, just let me read those 4 verses now. Let our sons in their youth, this is verse 12, let our sons in their youth be as grown-up plants, and daughters as corner pillars fashioned as for a palace. That's an interesting thought. What he's saying, I think, is that they want the young men to be strong, mature beyond their age. We want that generation of young men to be outstanding, mature, capable men. In other words, we want good military material from our youth. So this is a prayer that the upcoming generation will be strong military men and men of maturity and capability. And for the young women, of course, when you look at that, they really are saying we want our young women to be as beautiful as the carved pillars of a palace. And I think it might also mean we want our young women to be as sturdy as those pillars. So we want the women to be beautiful but sturdy. Then let's get on with verse 13. Let our garners be full. In other words, let every place that we store food, let it be full of all kinds of food. And it finishes, furnishing every kind of produce, and our flocks bring forth thousands and 10,000s in our fields. In other words, our crops, we want to produce everything we need and plenty of it, and we want our flocks of sheep and goats to be very prolific in reproduction. And when you get to verse 14, it's extended even to our herds of cattle. Verse 14, let our cattle bear without mishap and without loss. Let there be, and here's a separate issue, I think, let there be no outcry in the streets. And talk about that in a moment. How blessed are the people who are so situated. How blessed are the people whose God is the Lord. So this is a prayer for the people and the nation of Israel, a strong upcoming generation who are going to be capable and mature beyond their years. Then it's going to be particularly prosperous, particularly with agricultural abundance, full storage bins of all kinds of variety of produce, flocks that reproduce at great levels, herds of cattle that produce at great levels. And then that final piece of verse 14. Let me go back and read it again. Let there be no outcry in our streets. Let me tell you what I think that is. I think that's a plea that says, Lord, take us to the point where we have peace and no strife. Let our nation be at peace without internal or strife or external strife. Riches without fear seems to be the goal of that particular request. So I want to compare that petition for blessing with God's warning of judgment to the northern kingdom before it fell. So this is not going to be a comparison, really. It's going to be a contrast. And the contrast I'm going to read is from Amos chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. Amos, if you recall, was from Judah. He was a southern boy, so to speak, who was sent to the northern kingdom to prophesy and give God's warning of their impending doom because of who they are, what they were doing, and what was going to happen. Here we are, Amos 4, verses 2 and 3, where God makes the general warning and compare it with the request for peace and judgment by the people of Judah that we just read. The Lord, this is verses 2 and 3 of Amos 4, the Lord has sworn by his holiness. There's nothing higher for God to swear by than his holiness. We say, I swear by God to bang. And God says, that's me. There's nobody higher. Behold, the days are coming upon you, northern kingdom, when they will take you away with meat hooks. Now, that's not an interesting thought. Drugged by meat hooks, you have to first get the hook into the person before you drag them. And the last of you with fish hooks. Hooks nonetheless, even though likely smaller than meat hooks. Still, they are hooks. And it implies that you'll be drugged against your will and drugged in pain and misery. Verse 3, you will go out through the breaches in the wall. In other words, your walls of protection are going to be broken down. There'll be holes in the wall for troops to come in, and you're going to go out through them, each one straight before her. Amos spent a lot of time talking to the women of the northern kingdom and going after them for their poor behavior. And the rest of verse 3, and you will be cast to Harmon. That's a reference, I believe, to Assyria, declares the Lord. So, what again are they saying? You're going to be taken away with meat hooks or fish hooks. You'll go out through the holes in the wall that have been breached. So have been taken militarily. You'll be dominated by a foreign nation, and that was Assyria. You will go out through the breaches in the wall, each one straight before you. You won't go to the right or the left. You go straight out because you're being drugged by meat hooks. And you will be cast into a foreign land, meaning you will have no place of worship according to what God commands. You will have no land of your own. You will be in captivity. That's a declaration from God as a warning to the nation's kingdom. Now go back and read again what verses 7 and 8 said. That's particularly verse 8. I don't want to go there. Where do I want to go? Let our sons in their youth be as grown-up plants, and our daughters as corner pillars fashioned as for a palace. Let our garners be full, furnishing every kind of produce, and our flocks bringing forth thousands and 10,000s in our field. Let our cattle bear without mishap, no miscarriage, no stillborns, and without loss. Let there be no outcry in our streets, let things be peaceful and calm, no strife. How blessed are the people who are so situated. How blessed are the people whose God is the Lord. In other words, it's saying, as long as God is in charge, you are obedient, and God is blessing you. That's in stark contrast to being taken over by a foreign nation and placed into captivity, as Judah was later. Again, the prayer of this particular Psalm 144 has asked for deliverance, protection, and prosperity. In other words, they're saying, hey, Lord, save, protect, and bless, please. Excuse me. We can compare this with a petition from an earlier royal psalm, Psalm 72. You remember we did look at that, verses 15 through 17. This is a petition that's fundamentally a petition for the king, not the nation. But you'll notice in it, when the king is blessed, there is an expectation the nation will be blessed as well. So the nation is a part of this prayer. Psalm 72, verses 15, 16, and 17. So may he live, the king, And may the gold of Sheba be given to him, and let them pray for him continually. Let them bless him all the day long. That's the king doing well. May there be abundance of grain in the earth on top of the mountains. This is now extending to the nation. Its fruit will wave like the cedars of Lebanon. May those from the city flourish like vegetation on the earth. It's even praying that the people will reproduce prolifically. And verse 17, may his name endure forever, the king's name. May his name increase as long as the sun shines. In other words, let this go on forever. Let men bless themselves by him. Let all nations call him blessed. So it's a prayer for the king, but notice in the midst of it, if the king is blessed, the nation will be blessed, the people will be blessed. So it's centered on the king, but the request for the people in the land will result because of that blessing on the king. The last request of Psalm 144 likely asks for peace with no interruption by war or sorrow or calamity. Pure, almost, what's the term that we use? Can't even think of it now. You get used to my losing some words now and there. Utopia, a utopia-like setting. So note one thing, these requests actually acknowledge that all good things come from where? From and through Yahweh. There's no statement in here that says, let us be this productive. Let us cause our flocks. No, it's all God's doing. Blessings are acts of grace, unearned. Most of us don't think we see that in the Psalms, but the Psalms are full of the acts of grace on the part of our God. In closing, I'd like to give just a short quote from John Calvin. He was quick to warn about misunderstanding one's true state of life when prosperity is not the blessing. This tail end of 144 asked for perfect conditions for the people and the state of Israel. But Calvin says, what if that isn't the truth? And he reads something like this. We are to observe this, that God, in giving us meat and drink, admits us to the enjoyment of a certain measure of happiness, which is what that prayer was in 144 was about. But, he goes on to say, it does not follow that those believers are miserable who struggle through life in want and poverty. Now he gives the answers to why that can be true. Why, when you struggle through life, you always have need, you always are short of money. If that's your life, why would you not be miserable? And this is how Calvin answers that. For this want, whatever it be, God can counterbalance by better consolations. How do we read that? We read that from Romans 8:28. For God works all things for good to those who are loved by him and who love him. So in other words, God can take any situation and give you better consolation, better sense of security, better sense of joy than the prosperity could have done. So, just because times can be difficult does not mean that God won't bring something positive out of it. That's one of the things people have. How can God exist and be good in spite of all the evil in the world? Well, the answer is we don't know how he's going to do it. We just know he has done it, he can do it, and he will do it according to his promises, at least for those who are his people. Well, where are we going to go next? Not going to tell you. I haven't made up my mind as the fact of the matter, but we will get on with something else. We've only had 307 sessions so far on the internet, so we're going to continue that for a bit longer.